Welcome, Seema. So happy to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, I want to start by reading a little bit from your bio, and because I think it's a great launching pad. You wrote, even though I had spent my entire life doing everything I was supposed to do and checking off all the boxes so I could have a good life, in quotes, I felt empty, lacking purpose, and devoid of passion. So let's launch from there because you aren't alone, I'm sure, in that experience of doing all kind of the linear track and checking the boxes and then being like, I feel kind of empty. Tell us about these boxes you were checking and when you were having this sort of epiphany.
So the boxes that I had laid out in front of me were, one set forth for me culturally, and from my family's, by family members, by their friends, and what we see in pop culture and everything else. I grew up, the daughter of Indian blue collar immigrants, the only daughter, and traditionally Indian culture is very patriarchal. And my dad is kind of that generation. And so I had all these expectations put on me. You're not good enough unless you earn a lot of money, and you're not good enough unless you're obedient to your husband, and you're not good enough unless your mother-in-law is happy and have children, and you're a doctor, and blah 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 blah. And and I was, I think, scared of failing, scared of failing my parents, scared of, being taken advantage of. And, but yet I allowed myself to be taken advantage of in more ways than one. Um, just because I didn't have a sense of who the heck I even was, or what that meant. And so I remember kind of my answer. I earned my bright new shiny doctor title, and off I went to work thinking that I had it all figured out. I married my college sweetheart, and he was, this good Indian boy who's a good doctor, and comes from a good Indian family. Um and so I had my husband and I had my title, and I thought I was set. And I started working, and I thought, oh, I know the reason I'm not happy is because the office is just in a bad part of town. And so I shift to a different office. And then, oh, well, the reason I'm not happy is blah, blah, blah. And oh, it's the patients. Oh, it's the office manager. Oh, it's whatever. And, I thought, oh, I know, I'll go off. And I want to have a kid. I totally, genuinely, I did want to be a mom. And so I thought, well, that's why I feel so empty inside. And I wound up, I remember you asked about the moment I kind of figured it out, or whatever, the defining moment. We were in a cold, drafty apartment. Husband was working all the time as an attending, first year out, studying for boards, never really home. When he was home, he was studying. I had this 5-month-old baby, and I just didn't want to do it. And I was feeling guilty because I didn't want to do the mom thing. I was tired, and I was being told, oh, well, it's just because, you're a mom. And I'm like, well, what does that even mean? Um, and I remember the backstory of that. I'll just, for time's sake, cut out. But I remember my son being 5 months old, and he was crying and crying and crying and crying and crying, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And I thought to myself, I'm done. I'm done. I'm crying. He's crying. There's no end. 3 hours in, we're both still crying. And I thought, I can't do this anymore. I'm out. And I remember being on the floor of that cold, drafty apartment, and just kind of hearing this voice of like, no, you're not done. There's more. Hold on. Hold on. And thank God I did. And I somehow found the strength to advocate for myself. And I always tell people yoga saved my life, because I found yoga, and it first was kind of therapeutic, and then it became a passion. And because I allowed myself to open up to that experience, I credit my son for being the kid who broke me, and the kid who forged me from nothing to something that I could never imagine I would have been otherwise.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I have tears in my eyes. There's so much there that so many women can relate to. This it's a crown of sorts that's been placed on us as the matriarch, as the person who's also supposed to take care of everything, and yet also the added modern day pressure of being more than a mom, having a career. And it's, it used to be, I remember in the 80s, there was this kind of idea of being a super mom. And I think we've all realized that that is not possible to be really excellent at all things. And that's the pressure you were feeling. And it's so interesting you had that sensation, all the sensorial memories of that, the cold and the surroundings and the crying and this, that what that was doing to your nervous system. And I think probably every mom can relate to that, or any single parent or a dad who's the primary caregiver can relate to that. But I really commend you because I imagine that not only having the pressures of just being a woman, but adding on to that the cultural, um, you know, residue of your parents' expectations, that was probably a lot to break through and forge a different path. So tell us a little bit about this path that you started. So you discovered yoga, and what did it do for you right away?
So at first, it was just an excuse to get out of the house. I when I told my husband I was like something's wrong with me, he denied it because it was easier. And so that was kind of our compromise. And I when I say this, I always want to caveat. Um, he was doing the best he could with what he had. Um, Parents raised me with doing the best with what they could too. So lots of grace for everybody who was just trying to do their best, and here we are landing in this sticky situation. Um, but so our compromise was maybe you just needed to get out of the house. So for an hour, I think 2 or 3 times a week, we somehow managed to let me have that time. Um, and so it was interesting. I actually it was a hot yoga class, and camel pose was stressing. Was one I just couldn't do. Not surprisingly now, but in the moment then I was just like, I can't do it. I cannot get myself. And yes, there's spinal flexibility was part of it, but um, all the depression and opening up that chakra and everything else, and it was just interesting because now it's one of my favorite asanas. Um, and it's just so funny to see kind of that transition. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think just what it did for you is it shook you up to release some things that you probably needed to, and give you clarity on things that there's hope, that there's hope beyond those feelings that you were experiencing. And I think that happens a lot, is like when we're in these downward moments or downward spirals, that's all we can feel. And
right.
I think when we get into our body and just feel something a little bit different, it is that ray of hope that I don't have to be stuck in this feeling that is so burdensome and heavy. Now, how did you connect your being a dentist with doing yoga, becoming a yoga teacher, and et cetera? What went from there, those initial classes in yoga?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time I just went to class, right? Like, it was interesting because then it sort of started to all the other limbs of yoga were they weren't really there for me. The idea of non-judgment and all the other limbs basically. um but I remember kind of when I did finally go back to work, because I stayed at home, because that's what good moms do, is they stay at home. And so I did. And if you're when I finally did go back to work, there was just so much, right? You talked about building connection with your body and kind of what's going on. Um, and I would kind of feel myself just sort of like, ow, that kind of hurt. Dentistry, nobody tells you, but it's very physically taxing. Very,
Yes.
very, very, very physically taxing. And if you don't know how to take care of yourself, it's going to eat you alive. I just started, I started becoming the dentist that dropped into yoga poses during surgeries. I would just completely scrubbed in, like have my gloves on, place my instruments carefully on the tray. And with the patient there, I would find a break and be like, listen, my neck is really hurting. I'm going to take, and I would kind of drop into these sterile triangle poses or pyramid poses or warriors or whatever. And as soon as I would just kind of do that little self-care, was able to kind of return to, okay, what do you need, patient? How can I make you comfortable? Because now the pain in my neck is kind of subsided and I can think clearly, and the procedure started to go better. I started to lead with my ego less, that whole idea of like, I'm the doctor and I know everything and you're just the patient. And all of that narrative started to shift. And so when I started bringing those other limbs of yoga, subconsciously, I didn't know I was doing it, into my clinical practice, that's when the magic really started to happen. And I started feeling like, okay, I actually do have more to give. Oh my gosh, I actually enjoy, you know, seeing patients and doing the procedures and all of those things. And I was able to come home and have still more to give to my husband and to my kids. And I was able to find time for myself. And so things just got easier once I started employing these practices.
Now, can you give an example besides the, doing a pose of how you brought the philosophical tenets, wove that into your daily life and into your professional life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that whole idea of curiosity, right? Um, just opening your ears and to learn to come from a place of, we're not different. We have commonality. You have wisdom within you. I mean, the whole idea of you are the master and the student, we're all the master and the student. That was something that was really, especially, when you have a 3-year-old that is, complaining because you gave them the red cup instead of the blue cup. It's difficult in that moment to think to yourself or even consider that they too are the master, right? But the ability to be like, okay, hold on. It's not silly. It's not stupid. Oh, they just want to be heard.
Hmm.
They just want mommy to feel like I get it, right? Like they need that at age 3. They need that at age 13, I would assume. I don't have a 13-year-old yet, but my
I have a
11,
20-year-old. Yes, I can tell
yeah,
you, and a 17-year-old. So yes, they need it. In fact, in a different way, and almost more, even though
right?
they're very independent and capable, they always need that sense of being heard and being seen.
Yeah, we all need that.
Of course.
So it was really life-changing to be able to develop empathy, curiosity, willingness to explore, that it's difficult to shift
Yeah,
out of
and
that
I guess
ego.
in that you're also um, being curious about your own tendencies and habits and behaviors that have sometimes become reflexive and that aren't necessarily the most empathetic or compassionate. Was there anything that you noticed in your own behaviors that slowly changed with that kind of rising consciousness?
I mean, so much, right? The idea that I'm not your thought. I'm not my thoughts, right? I'm not like the idea that I'm co-creating the situation, that was so liberating for me. The idea that your thoughts create your words, create your, actions, create your, all of these things that lead to ultimately the co-creation of your life. You're directly responsible for that just by creating awareness for the thoughts and the sensations that come up as a result of them. So liberating.
Mm.
So liberating. And I thought to myself, why aren't they teaching us this when we become doctors? This is what makes a good doctor a great doctor. This is what makes a regular mom. We're all capable of being amazing, but we just don't have that skill set. And our patients deserve it. Our kids deserve it. Our spouses deserve it. But more than anything, we ourselves deserve to lead this way. We're just not taught how.
I love that. So you are using that and you're coaching people.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you took that leap? I mean, I'm also in the modern medical model in a lot of ways, and it is not set up for that. It is set up for you listen to your doctor, your PT, your dentist, whatever, and we don't have any info, as the patient, as the client, we don't really have any of the power. We're just listening and doing what we're told. And that's how it's set up. And it's like, that is not a good system at all, because we only know we know experience, and we know academic knowledge, but the person who's in front of us has a lot more knowledge about their situation and their
Right.
feelings. And so, like you said, it has to be a co-creation, it has to be a collaboration, but we're not certainly not set up to do that when you go and visit a doctor and you're given 10 minutes to kind of try and figure out all your needs, all your medical needs. And it's, yeah. So you're helping other professionals.
Yeah. I feel like kind of our fellow moms in medicine um, are the ones that need the most support and the most reluctant to get it because we, guilt ourselves about spending the time, spending the money, or whatever it may be. And but that's why I love supporting these female. Right now, most of my clients are female physicians because I guess that's just kind of who speaks or whatever, the female doctor. Um, and it's so cool to see how they, once they begin to source themselves and recognize what limiting beliefs that they've kind of had put on them or they put on them by themselves, once they start to put those down and explore, and then, a few weeks later, a few months later, whatever the time frame is, to have them come back and be like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm sleeping better. And like, we, all of these things, right? Like, oh, this is how my residents came and I got voted top doc and I got this. And I'm, being groomed for a leadership position, or they offered me a promotion, or, whatever it
Mm.
may be. It's so wonderful, so fulfilling.
I imagine that a lot of those early connections for anyone, it's such a relief to know actually you're not alone. So whenever people are experiencing this being a mom and being a professional, and I think there's, even though we might read about that there are other people that have these struggles, in those moments, there's a lot of feeling like this is me. And to actually just realize like this is a human experience that everybody experiences to some degree. I think that must be so comforting just to start off that way.
Absolutely. That is something that we're missing as humans. And then, of course, with each profession, I think it's still true in every profession. But since we're talking about medicine, that's a lot of what these mama docs are missing is connection and the ability to admit, like, I am human. And we talk about. I agree with you. The system is broken. I feel like it just doesn't work. It doesn't serve the patient. Um, However, and it's very easy to slip into that lower energy level of blaming the system. But I want to encourage everyone out there. Yes, the system has room for improvement, but don't give away your power. You can show up differently. We can just it's a skill. It's not easy to advocate for yourself and to learn to explore those thoughts and words and life habits that we've picked up. But don't give away your power. You as an individual are immensely, immensely capable of creating amazing things.
Yes, I think that's such a great point because yes, there are needed we have needs. Like I had to go to an endocrinologist on my thyroid. I have an autoimmune disease in my family, and this physician was saying, okay, we're going to do two choices. You take this antithyroid medicine for a year, but then it loses its efficacy and it possibly damages your liver. Or we can do radiation, and then we just give you a thyroid supplement. And I thought those are the only two choices. But if I had not had that like advocacy, because I basically was like, nah, neither one of those seem like a good idea to me. I want to go another route. And he's like, what? But it's like we have to come in there with, not like the Google knowledge, but just knowledge of, or at least inquiry, like, is there another way? Are there other options? Because those don't really feel right for me. So I appreciate your bringing that in, that it is a two-way street, that yes, the system is still providing us great care. It's just that we have to participate in it to really maximize, um, eh, our own benefits.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
yeah, I'd love to talk about your book now. It's called Connected, which is such a
Mhm.
great title. But anybody that writes a book, I always want to know what inspired you to write the book.
Well, not surprisingly, like many moms would say, my kids. Um, so I kind of touched on, my own what the heck is going on story, like the whole idea of looking up one day and being like, wait, I did everything right, and yet I'm really unhappy. What happened? And so I did this deep dive. And, yes, yoga was a part of it. And then I actually hired a life coach to help me and I was learning these lessons that the life coach was, the ideas and concepts that I do talk about in the book. And they were so grabbing and they were so simple, not easy to actually practice, quote unquote, perfectly, but they were simple and easy to understand. Um, and they were so powerful that I was like, you know what? I'm just going to tell my kids about them, see what happens, right? Maybe this might help, because I still felt like I was not the mom I knew I could be, right? Kind of just angry all the time. It was just not. It wasn't a terrible situation, but I knew it could be better. And what a dramatic difference! What a dramatic difference for them to eventually, it didn't take that long for them to start being more empathetic with each other, or just the whole family dynamic shifted in unimaginable, the most beautiful ways. And I thought, why? They're capable, and this was right as the pandemic was hitting. Okay, so I had then, let's see, my daughter was, I think, 5, about to be 6, um, and then my son was 8. So I thought, if they can figure it out, why aren't we? What? Like, I'm sure I could have started sooner. This is amazing. And at the time, I really kind of was having this identity crisis of like, I don't really want to be a dentist anymore, but I feel like, I don't know, like what all the lack of clarity that I had. And the publisher actually approached me because I had been doing some yoga inspired posts on Instagram, and they were like, hey, we want you to write a book. And I was like, I know what I want to write about. And so I literally meditated. I remember this clearly. I was sitting at my dining table. I think it was like June so just a few months into the pandemic. I'm a new meditator relatively. At that point, I was really new. And I sat there for 5 minutes, took some breaths, meditated. And the entire first section of the book that you read, that's pretty much what I wrote down in like an old used spiral. I just kind of hand wrote it out in like 45 minutes.
Hmm.
And that was the birth of the book.
Now, can you give us some examples of what you started implementing with your children that helped you see, wow, this is really relevant for anyone?
Yeah. We mentioned earlier recognizing your own self-destructive patterns. Um, so in so in the book, I talk about the guides and the guards. The guards are, essentially that anytime you're in essentially a lower energy emotion like anger or frustration or guilt or embarrassment or so on and so forth, just working to create that awareness for myself, and then saying, this is just one way to look at the situation, right? What are other ways I could see this? What else might be going on here? um Learning that for myself. And then once I got a little bit comfortable doing that internally, I would tell the kids, ah, I'm feeling right now my guards talking. And I explained what that meant, right? And I was like, so that means I need a time in to talk to my guard and figure out why they're talking. And just kind of modeling that, right? And it would just, now it's called at my house, it's called a time in ticket. Um, And nobody is above getting a time and ticket. You just, if it's dad or mom or brother or sister, and we see that those guards are talking, it's, we have that phrase, and the agreement is we stop and we either come together, have a hug or something, or we just step away, do what we need to do to kind of recenter and then try again.
I love that. I love that because yeah, like you're teaching children at such a young age this idea of feeling a feeling, but not necessarily reacting to it, but really becoming more aware of why you might be feeling that way.
Right.
And that's such a ingredient for resilience that we all need, but especially kids having that at their age, it's just going to benefit them greatly.
Mm-hmm.
So, what else do you have in the book? Is this made mostly for children, or is it made for any age?
If you're 8 or 80, I think there's something in here for you.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a lot of people tell me, I mean, it does look like a kid's book. And I wrote it in a way it's meant to be accessible for kids. But let's face it, we're all just kids in larger form walking around. And many of us are unhealed. And so, and even those of us that are healed, we still have a lot of healing left to do. And so the book, I think, is helpful just to kind of provide maybe some reframes or insights or just some tools and tips to kind of create differently.
And how do you think it's helped you with your own kind of background and history of being um, the only daughter of immigrants from India who had these certain kind of ideas and expectations? How have you used these tools to either better understand or have sympathy or even have a conversation with your parents about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mentioned earlier holding space for, like we have these boxes shoved on our list, and just the whole idea of learning and realizing like, oh my gosh, perspective, right? In the book I talk about, there's a tool called put on your perspective goggles and think about a time where things were difficult and it had a certain outcome that you maybe didn't want. And when we go back and we reflect on what that is, and what was that about, and what would I wanted to do differently, that the ability to empathize and see something from somebody else's perspective, so huge,
Huge.
right? So
Yes.
just that's been so key in allowing myself to forgive the fear-based boxes that my parents at the time seemed to shove onto my list. I mean, I can't imagine how difficult must it be for you to leave your entire family, come here with no money, you have no college degree, um, and land in a country where the culture is foreign. And I mean, this was the 80s. So this whole idea, like there's an Indian store every direction within 5 miles of my house now. That was not the case back in the day. And I grew up in a small town in Texas. I was ostracized for being Hindu, for being, my hair smelled funny, and my mom sounded funny, and all of these things, and um, just to have compassion for
Hmm.
all that they went through. For me, they did it for me and no one else. They didn't do it for themselves.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's so important to have for our parents. Like you said, they um they had the skills that they had at that time. And I think, like you said, to just be able to hold that grace and space for them, whether they change or not, that's not that's going to be on them, but that
Right.
we aren't trying to change them, that we're just trying to
Right.
accept from that different lens of appreciation. I love that. So, what is
Yeah.
next in store for you? What is now that you've written a book, do you want to go on tour? Do you want to do, um, write more books? What is your vision now?
I want this book to make an impact on a larger scale. Um, I think it's a good book. I think it's a great book. And I think that people that read it have all said kind of similar things. Oh my gosh, I wish I'd had this as a kid. Or, oh, this has made life with my, 10-year-old so much easier, or whatever it may be. And I can't help but wonder what life would be like for our children and for the future if we could teach them these skills of befriending all of them, not just the parts of life that they're good at. I want
Mm.
this book to make an impact. I want to amplify it. A book tour would be amazing. Amazing. I would love that. Um, and I want to continue to make an impact, with coaching as well and speaking as well. So um, all of these things. One of the things that I spend a lot of philanthropic time and effort on is creating learning equality in underserved children, in underserved populations through an organization called Pratham. Um, they started in India and now we're expanding globally. And education is kind of it's why I'm able to be here talking to you today. And it's a human right. It's a basic human right. And I believe that we should all have it. And I believe that the lessons that are in my book are part of our basic human rights to know.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Well, everyone, make sure you check out Connected. It'll be in the show notes for sure. Thank you, Seema, for taking time to share your history, your passions, your struggles, and ultimately this path to creating this wonderful book of connection and getting in touch with our emotions and how to best um, embrace them or challenge them to be our better selves. So, thank you so much.
I'm so grateful for your allowance of time and space. And thank you to all the listeners out there who have made time for themselves to hear my message. So thank you so much.
Yes, amen to that. And for everybody who's listening, as always, I'm pulling for you.